You're listening to Microbin Radio, progressively elevating the conversation. Coming up next, personalities and profiles. Here's your host, Michael S. Robinson.
And a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Personalities and Profiles here on Microbin Radio, where we're progressively elevating the conversation. I'm Michael Robinson. It's a pleasure to have your company with us today. We're streaming live from our studios, and we're live on Facebook. So download our app from the App Store or Google Play. Just look for Microbin Radio. It's a free app, so don't forget you can download that. Podcasts of this and prior shows are available on SoundCloud and microbinradio.com. Our weekly show, Personalities and Profiles, highlights featured guests who are making a difference within our communities across the country with life stories that are going to inspire you. And today we're going to be talking to one of our guests who has been in the midst of the Chernobyl meltdown that happened 31 years ago. For those of you who don't remember, 31 years ago on April 26, 1986, the world witnessed the worst nuclear plant disaster in human history, with the meltdown of number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine. Because there was no containment building to trap radiation, the radioactive fallout drifted over parts of Western Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, and even here in Eastern United States. Large areas of the Ukraine, Belarus, Russia were badly contaminated. In fact, 60% of the radioactive fallout landed in Belarus. Most people did not know that. And about 350,000 people were evacuated from the zone. Today, our featured guest is one of the few people who was granted unfettered access to the zone of exclusion, and he's here to share with us his journey and soon to be released a documentary on the Discovery Science Channel. His name is Philip Grossman. Currently, he works as Director of Global Solutions Architecture for Image Communications. He's also an internationally recognized photographer and cinematographer. With a solo exhibition at the United Nations, he is the first person to fly a multi-rotor drone into the Chernobyl zone of exclusion as part of his work in documenting the aftermath of the nuclear catastrophe. Over the past 6 years, Philip has made 10 expeditions and spent over 60 days in the zone of alienation. Wow, 10 expeditions. Filming, photographing, documenting the results of the world's worst nuclear power plant accident. He has spoken with survivors and those who chose to resettle in the zone to document their incredible stories. With a portfolio of over 60 hours of 4K video and over 20,000 photographs, Philip has been one of those individuals who's going to be producing this amazing documentary on the Science Channel. So I'm very happy to welcome you to the show, Philip. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
So
Thank you for having me.
Full disclosure, you were on my show last Saturday, and we had a good conversation.
Yes, exactly. Thank you again for having me.
So it's great to have you back again. And one of the things that I actually thought about very carefully after our conversation is that a lot of people really don't know about or don't remember this incident, right? Because it happened 31 years ago. And a lot of millennials whom I've spoken to said, what is that? So why is it important for us to not lose that moment in time?
Yeah, so it's actually, I'm quite surprised sometimes when I meet people who I say I've been working in Chernobyl, and they'll say, well, what's Chernobyl? Now, someone who's under 31 years of age, okay, I can sort of get that. It's just not taught in school, I guess, as much. But, the reason for me that I find that it's important that we it's always good. You have to learn from your mistakes. And this is one of the largest engineering mistakes ever in the world. And if we don't continue to study it and learn about it, we're destined to attempt to do this again. I joke with my father because, I was a good student, or I got good grades, but I was a poor student. And I used to always joke that I don't worry about history. It'll repeat itself. I'll learn it the second time around. But the reality is we really have to keep something like this in the forefront of engineering and science work to really point out that we're human beings, we're not infallible. And we really have to learn from what we had done in the past, and from all aspects. Engineering, this is as much an engineering problem as it was a socioeconomic and governmental problem.
I think also you can apply to any other kinds of new inventions that we're coming up with, any other kinds of new technological revolutions that we're sort of implementing in our world today. We have to look at the consequences of failure, right? What if this fails? How do you deal with it? How do you ensure that the common good is not in jeopardy, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here.
Correct. It's, I think it was Google or somebody who says fail fast, or fail often, fail fast, because you learn from your mistakes, and that's how you progress forward.
Right.
Now, hopefully we succeed more than we fail. If we continue to fail at something, maybe we should do something different.
Right.
But this is a perfect example of we need to continue to reevaluate what had happened there in order for us to progress and go further. A lot of people will say, you must be very anti-nuclear, having seen the results of the accident. And the reality is I'm not anti-nuclear. There are a lot of great successes, and as we move forward, it's really, especially if you're in the green movement and looking for carbon neutral, carbon reduction footprint, nuclear is really the answer. But we have to learn from what happened here, not only from an engineering perspective, but the larger geopolitical aspect of the accident.
So let's go to the event. A lot of people have never heard of the zone of exclusion. I mean, it was my first time hearing about it when I sort of interviewed you. Let's tell people what that means. What is the zone of exclusion?
Yes, so the accident happened on April 26, 1986 at about 1:24 in the morning. There's a city not far from Chernobyl, the nuclear power plant, called Pripyat, about a mile and a half. That area wasn't evacuated until about 2.5 days after the accident. The Soviet Union tried to sort of keep this under wraps. And once it got out that this accident had happened, and the United Nations, the IAEA were involved, they started building and designating areas and measuring the radioactivity and the fallout, and basically decided within this, what's now called the zone of exclusion, no one can live because the levels of radiation are too high. And so that area is about the size of Rhode Island, a little over 1,000 square miles. And to this day, no one officially lives in there since the accident. Now, there were about 1,200 people that moved back into their homes illegally, but the Russian government at that point did not really forcibly ask them to leave. They just sort of turned a blind eye to it. Today, there's about 30 or 35 people left as permanent residents in the zone. There are about 1,000 people or so that work in the zone on a daily basis, because the reactors themselves, although they've been shut down, are in the process of being decommissioned, and that process takes nearly 20 to 30 years and could take slightly longer because of the issues with reactor number 4.
Mm-hmm. So there were 4 reactors, right? That's what I'm getting. What happened to the other 3 reactors? Were they also shut down?
Correct. So there were 4 reactors, and there were 2 more under construction at the time of the accident. And the actual plan for the Chernobyl complex was to have a total of 12 reactors. The 4 reactors that were there provided about 20% of the power to the Ukraine. So at the time of the accident, the other 3 reactors were shut down. But within 6 months, once they had built what's known as the sarcophagus that covered the old reactor, they brought the other 3 reactors back online because they needed power. The Soviet Union were in the midst of the Cold War, and they needed power. So those reactors continued to run. The last reactor wasn't shut down until 2000, December 15th, the year 2000. So it actually ran for another 14 years after the accident.
Oh, wow. They were actually running.
Yeah, they needed the power.
Oh, wow. Wow, I had no idea. That's interesting. Now, how many people died as a result of this? Because I think that sort of is a bit blurry in people's minds.
Yeah, so the official death toll document, which I have a copy of, says 31 people. That includes several first responders and some people within the reactor itself. The reality is, from the World Health Organization, the estimate is about 4,000 to 5,000 people will have succumbed to cancer or other ailments as a direct result of the accident. It's a stochastic analysis, as sort of a randomization, how people react to large doses, large exposure to radiation. Yeah. So that's, if you can say there's a positive out of this, we've really learned a lot about the exposure to radiation and how people and wildlife react and sort of overcome the high levels and doses. One of the things, one of the professors I've spoken to is actually studying and has found that although a lot of people died from heart disease, or that they thought was heart disease, what they're now discovering is it may actually have been a result of the radiation. The direct radiation, the ionizing radiation, has an impact on the heart muscle. Mm-hmm. So we're learning a lot about the results of exposure.
I understand that antioxidants play a great role in sort of reversing that as well. I saw something on, I think it was PBS the other day, that was talking a little bit about that, and they're saying that when antioxidants were introduced into rats that were affected by radiation, it kind of began reversing the effects of, or repairing the heart muscles, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I do know that the effects of radiation are basically damaging the chromosomal structures in your body. It's high energy is what it is, a high electrical voltage. And so it damages and causes cells to mutate. So anything, vitamins and obviously antioxidants, things that we take that would normally repair muscles, I could imagine would have an impact on repairing the effects of the exposure to radiation to some level.
So what is the radiation like today?
So that's funny. I get asked that question a lot. The village of Chernobyl, which is what the plant is named after, is about 15 kilometers or 8 miles from the reactor itself. The radiation level in that village itself, the background radiation level, if you measure with a Geiger counter, is about 0.2 to 0.3 microsieverts is the measurement, which is about the same as Atlanta, Georgia, where I live today. The issue is that when you get closer to the reactor, there are areas that do have very, very large levels of background radiation. And that's why it's sort of unsafe to live there, is because not knowing where these things are unless you're constantly walking around with a Geiger counter measuring.
Mm-hmm. So what is radiation for most of us who are totally ignorant? Is it sort of like dust? Is it a particle? Is it a substance? What is it?
So that's
jelly-like?
One of the benefits of the research that I've been doing as a part of this is I'm a civil engineer by schooling and training, and I started studying nuclear engineering early on before I switched to civil. And this process has really got me back into the nuclear engineering and really learning and understanding and being able to explain what radiation is. Radiation, there are particles that emit, and it's called ionizing radiation. There are different forms of radiation. There's infrared radiation, light is radiation, your microwave uses radiation, but it's the ionizing radiation. It's a very specific type of radiation. These particles have higher neutrons in the center of the nucleus of the atom. And what happens as it's given off, or as the neutron changes or gives off electrons, it releases energy, high levels of energy, 10,000, 100,000 what they call electron volts. And it's this energy coming off of these particles. In most cases, it's cesium-137, iodine, americium, plutonium. These are all byproducts of a nuclear reactor or a fission process. It's those particles in a nuclear reactor. One of the biggest side products or byproducts is that cesium-137, which is a salt. So if you imagine taking table salt and finely pulverizing it into a fine dust, that's what cesium-137 is. And of course, because it's a salt, it is soluble in water, so when it rains, it dilutes, covers things, and so you have these radioactive particles on the ground or on items. So just in the air, there isn't necessarily radioactive particles, although that's one of the things we worry about, is kicking up dust, because you could then ingest them. But so you have to get close to something that is radioactive.
Wow, fascinating. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back, because I want to share with you a B-roll of part of Phil's journey into Chernobyl. So stay with us right here on Microbin Radio as we talk about personalities and profile. My guest today, Phil Grossman. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Personalities and Profiles here on Microbin Radio, progressively elevating the conversation.
Your daughter is having trouble learning French. Do you A, hire a tutor?
Bonjour.
B, enforce a French-only rule at home? Or C, watch some foreign films. When it comes to parenting, there are no perfect answers, but that's okay, because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Teens in foster care will love you just the same.
I'm Diane Keaton, and I was diagnosed with skin cancer when I was 21. But, it didn't seem like a big deal to me. And then it happened again and again. And finally, I got the drift, and I started wearing sunblock. Duh. But, it's not so simple with melanoma, because melanoma is the deadliest form of skin cancer. So won't you please join me in a nationwide effort to stop this killer by visiting itsthatworthit.org. Okay, do you have that? Itsthatworthit.org, okay?
As a kid, I knew what my parents did, but that world doesn't even exist anymore. If you don't know you need the skills, the education, if you're not exposed to it, how are you going to succeed? My role models, lawyers, engineers, they gave me a belief in myself. And that's junior achievement, man. What can I say? Volunteer. Change your world.
So there you are, shuffling through a stack of resumes, and you come to mine. This is it. First impression. My way in. But can my resume show you how I truly stand out? Like that I was studying, going to night school while working 2 jobs just to help my parents pay for groceries. Or being the first one to always step up. No, that's something you just can't put on paper. Look beyond the resume and discover new ways to develop great talent that is dedicated, hardworking, and determined like me.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Now back to the show.
And hi there, welcome back. I'm Michael Robinson, and you're listening to Personalities and Profiles here on Microbin Radio. My featured guest is Philip Grossman. We're discussing his journey into Chernobyl and soon to be released documentary on the Discovery Science Channel. Philip, I know you gave us a B-roll, and I was fascinated by the fact that we were able to see sort of like a broad spectrum of Chernobyl, and I'd like to share that with our viewers today. So I'm going to ask our production team to play the reel for us, and if you can walk us through the journey of the reel and give us some insight into what we're looking at, that would be awesome.
Sure.
Okay.
So this is the probably one of the most famous elements within the Chernobyl zone itself. This is the city of Pripyat. This is the Ferris wheel. There's stories that this was supposed to open, this amusement park was supposed to open on May 1st, so 4 or 5 days after the accident. And of course it never opened. The reality is that the park did open to Communist Party members a little bit earlier, about a week or two earlier, because I have seen historical photographs of people actually on the Ferris wheel, or in this case, you're looking at the bumper cars. And this is sort of right behind what's known as city center of Pripyat. It was a very uniquely Russian design center. What we're seeing right now to the right is the city management offices, and this is the Hotel Palasi. So it was a very modern hotel at the time, and actually that hotel was used as sort of the operational base for the accident and the cleanup and evacuation. This is one of 2 we call the twin towers within the Pripyat area. This is actually a school. One of the things that's most fascinating about the area is that the buildings are now just starting to collapse, and this is one of the first ones that I witnessed to have collapsed, and it was a middle school. And there are about 14 middle schools or secondary schools within the city. This is what's known as the Palace of Culture, was sort of a center for sports, recreation, as well as art and entertainment within the city. This is one of the gymnasiums within that particular facility. You also had a boxing ring, 2 swimming pools. This is the grand hall that you would have entered in with large glass windows. And this is sort of an overview. You can see the Ferris wheel to the right and city center with the Palace of Culture in the middle. This is what's known as the Jupiter factory, which for the longest time, if you look at the size of this thing supposedly made radios and alarm clocks. The reality is it was dual use. It actually made things for military purposes. And if you watch the show, you'll learn a little bit about what that was. And this is Zamoisia, one of the few churches that's left in what would have been a village about 6 kilometers from the reactor complex. That church is actually in Kresny. That's where I got married. My wife and I got married in the zone, something very personal for us. Near the village of Chernobyl was the Pripyat, the Chernobyl port, and this is where a lot of barges were located, as well as these cranes. The barges would bring up raw concrete material. They'd take it off of these with the cranes onto the ground, mix it, load it onto helicopters, and dump it into the reactor, trying to put out the fire at the time of the accident. And this is one of 2 cooling towers that were under construction at the time. And you can see in the background as you come up over the cooling tower, the nuclear complex. In the far backside, you can see early construction of what's now the new sarcophagus. And in the foreground, which you see right now, is reactors 5 and 6, which were under construction at the time. They were supposedly, by reports, about 70% complete. But if you look, they were nowhere near 70% complete, more closer to 35-40% complete. You can see in the background there's a large lake. So this is what's known as the Duga 3. It was an over-the-horizon radar installation for detecting intercontinental ballistic missiles. It was also known as the Russian woodpecker because it made a sound like a woodpecker ticking. And this was an object that was about 10 kilometers from the reactor. And it was used to detect our intercontinental ballistic missiles. I've been inside the training rooms on the ground, and you actually can see drawings with all the information about all of our various intercontinental ballistic missiles. My Russian is about that much. I know enough to read it, and I started reading. I could make out the words Minuteman and ICBM and MX, and it started to dawn on me that they had all this information about our missile technologies in the mid-'80s.
Right, a relic of the Cold War, huh?
Correct, yep.
Describe for us the feeling of being there. I mean, I'm looking at the video and I'm certainly stunned by how much it seems like a ghost town, almost like a horror movie of sorts. What was it like for you?
Yeah, the first time I ever went was in November 2011. And, it was overcast, and I thought, it's going to be horrible for photographs. I wanted sun. But it actually turned out to be rather interesting because it really gave a stronger feeling to what the place is like. It is completely abandoned. No one lives there. There's especially in the wintertime with the overcast skies, it is quiet, very few animals. And it's surreal. The first time on that first trip in 2011, I managed to gain access to the reactor control room of reactor number 4. And it took me about 30 seconds before it dawned on me where I was standing when I was in that control room and what had taken place there at that time 25 years earlier. And every time I go back, I'm just struck by how barren and abandoned it is. There's nothing there. And that's sort of what I've been documenting over the last 5 years is what is happening, how nature is taking over, as well as learning more and more about the people who lived there and the life that went on there, and discovering buildings that there's a train station, discovering the bus stop, empty lockers. We go through the various apartments. Most of it cleaned out because of the high levels of radiation. They had what they call liquidators come into the city after the accident and basically remove most of the personal belongings and leave them and bury them nearby. Every time we go, we try to find someplace new to see if we can't get some more information about what life was like and what happened. And we would look for cities or villages in the outskirts, and most of them had been picked over by thieves or had been cleaned out because they were very close to the reactor. But we did come across one that was almost intact, and I knew the day that the people left because they had one of those tearaway calendars, and it said May 5th. It was the last date on that calendar. Their coffee cups were in the sink, and there were some photographs on the ground. My thought was I picked one of the photographs up and I have it with me, and in hopes maybe someday I'll come across somebody who knows somebody in that photograph and I can return it to them because it's all their personal belongings. Just imagine if you were told you have it was a city of 50,000 people, Pripyat. You had 3 hours to pack up your personal belongings. You were told you were only going to be gone for 2 days, maybe. 1,000 buses came in, and the entire city was evacuated in 3 hours, and no one ever returned.
I read a story that a couple of people did return and are living in the exclusion zone. There was an older couple that I saw that has been living there for about 10 years now and planted vegetation, literally living off the land because there's no grocery store or supermarkets anywhere. And they seem to be happy. So it's very interesting how the human body is probably resilient to this sort of exposure.
Yeah, and I've actually interviewed several. They refer to them as resettlers. And I spoke with a couple, Grandpa Sava and his wife Elena, and they lived about a kilometer from the edge, a little over half a mile from the edge of Pripyat. In their home, and they moved back 10 days after the accident. And I visited with them in 2015, I believe it was, and spent an hour interviewing and speaking with them. What I found most interesting is for them, there's such this attachment to their homes. These are homes that their great-great-grandparents had built in the 1700s, and this is where their families have grown up, and that's where they were born and raised, and they didn't want to leave. Grandpa Sava just passed away about 2 years ago at the age of 84, 85, from natural causes, as much as I could understand from speaking with people of a heart attack or a heart ailment. And there are others that, this is all they knew. They wanted to move back, so they moved back after the accident. And that's where they wanted to be no matter what. And you're right, they live off the land. Every time we would go to the villages to speak with them, we always brought food, and vodka is a key item of commerce there.
Of course, it's Russia.
Yeah, with one of the resettlers we visited, they were so nice. They have very little, and they invited us into their home, laid out a spread with pickles and bacon fat and meats and some bread, and she brought out this moonshine that she made. It was the strongest stuff. 2 shots and I had a buzz on. And she was just the happiest lady. And I happened to have been visiting that village at the time that the propane truck came, and so I bought the propane for all their homes for the rest of now it wasn't very expensive, and it was the least I could do for them, opening their homes to us. And every year that I go back, we try and go and see them and say hello and take them gifts, and thank them for helping us and helping me with understanding the human aspect. And that's why I say that the most important part of learning from the accident is what the impact on human lives, not just physically but emotionally.
Right, exactly. So you have your upcoming Discovery Channel documentary. Tell us a little bit more about that and what we can expect.
Yeah, so I can't say too much about it.
Okay.
But it will air at the end of August, I believe is the date, and hopefully we'll start having advertising running in the next week or so. And it's really sort of the culmination of the 6 years of work that I've been doing there in trying to document what happened, what transpired. There's some, I've been there, as I said, multiple times, and every time I learn something new. And even on this time, I never wanted to feel jaded. Sometimes I'm like, I know the story, but even this time, I got to meet and speak with some interesting people and some different sort of angles and revelations about what caused the accident, and what life was like there.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for sharing this story with us, because I think it's a necessary story to be shared. And like we talked about at the beginning, it's important for us to remember history, right? So we don't repeat the same mistakes again. As a human species, oftentimes we have a short-lived memory. So I appreciate your sharing that with us today, and we look forward to seeing it on the Discovery Channel and finding out all the nuances involved. Thank you, Philip.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share it. And just to let you know, it's Discovery Science Channel, so it's their Science Channel brand.
Perfect.
Correct. And
very
it's
good.
the 31st of August, I believe, is the air date.
Okay, very good. My best to
Thank you,
sir. Okay. We've come to the end of another Personalities and Profiles here on Microbin Radio. Thank you so much for joining us today. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Microbin Radio. Don't forget, you can download our app from the App Store or Google Play. Look for Microbin Radio. And you can catch repeats of this and prior shows every day on Microbin Radio along with my show, The Michael S. Robinson Show, this Saturday on AM 970 The Answer in New York City's leading talk radio station, AM 970 The Answer. Thank you very much. I'm Michael Robinson. Remember, this is your time. Use it wisely.
This program is sponsored by Microbit Incorporated.